there's a kind of a common vision, I think, that probably brings you together as you go, bring this to an end. It's a vision of wanting your world to look differently than it does, in as much as you want to transform ideas into events that serve people. You want to create, I want to suggest to you perhaps a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. The prophet Habakkuk writes, "The vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it." But my sense of you already is that you don't want to really wait with your arms crossed and tapping your feet and staring at your watch. You want to make something happen. And just in the brief time I have with you, maybe I can suggest some things or invite you to think of something. I think in the end, what we're called to do is to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And to that end, what folks are called to do, I think, is to stand at the very edges, at the margins, with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, to stand with those whose dignity has been denied, to stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. With any luck, you get to stand with the easily despised or the readily left out. And on really good days, maybe you can even stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, or with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. It's about seeking some kind of compassion that can stand in awe at what the poor have to carry rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. It's about kinship. Mother Teresa used to diagnose the world's ills correctly, I think, by suggesting that the problem is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that we belong? It's not about service in the end, I don't think. Service is the beginning. Service is the hallway that leads to the ballroom, but the ballroom is about kinship. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no peace. I think that's the way it works. Cesar Chavez once was talking to a reporter, and the reporter said to him, "Wow, the farm workers sure love you." And he looked at him and he said, "It's mutual." And I think that's kind of where we're called to be as people on this planet, is to enjoy the mutuality of our own kinship with each other, where there is no us and them, there's just us. Everything of importance that I've ever learned in the last 25 years working with gang members has really come from the gang members. Like lately, they've been teaching me how to text. I don't know what we did before this. It sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people, but I've become quite good at it. You know, LOL and OMG and BTW, and there's a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for "Oh hell no." And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. So I'm in a car with two homies, Manuel and Poncho, and we're driving to Palm Desert, and both of them work for me out of 300 gang members from rival gangs who work for me at Homeboy Industries. And so we're driving, and we meet at 9, and we drive to Palm Desert to speak at this high school. And we're about half hour into the trip, and Manuel in the front seat gets a text, and I can hear the telltale incoming, zzz, and he reads it. He starts to chuckle. I go, "What is it?" "Oh, it's stupid. It's Snoopy back at the office." Well, we just saw Snoopy, a half hour before, and I greeted him, so he was there in the office. I said, "What's he have to say?" "Oh, it's dumb. Let me see. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy." Well, we died laughing. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. And now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. It's about recognizing that we're in this together, and that in the end, nothing else will matter very much unless we've accomplished some sense of mutuality and a sense of kinship. Even in service, there's a distance, service provider, service recipient, and how do we get to that place where we obliterate that illusion of separation, that there is any separation? I remember there was a homie named Caesar. We all called him Dreamer, and he was a kind of a knucklehead. He grew up in the projects where I was pastor for many years, and I got him lots of jobs through Homeboy Industries. He either worked for us or out in the private sector. But then he'd gravitate back to criminality and selling drugs and getting high, and so he just finished a year stretch in prison. So he shows up in my office, and he has sort of a dangerous sense of humor, and he was saying to me, "This time it'll be different." Homies always say that. So I call a friend with him right there, a friend who owns a vending machine company in Alhambra. And so this guy hires him right away. Well, 2 weeks later, Caesar's in my office, and he's waving his paycheck. And he says, "Damn, G, this paycheck makes me feel proper. My mom, she's not ashamed of me, and my kids, they're proud of me." And he looks at me and he says, "And you know who I have to thank for this job?" And I said, "Well, who?" He looked at me strangely and he said, "Well, God, of course." I said, "Well, sure. No. Yeah, no, absolutely." And he said, "You thought I was going to say you, didn't you?" And I said, "No, gosh, God's number one. Yeah." He said, "You are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days." And I said, "I'm sorry, them Genesis days?" He goes, "Yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now." Well, I guess he told me, and suddenly kinship so quickly. Not about service provider, service recipient. It's about we're in this together. Homeboy Industries was born during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, called Dolores Mission, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village, and together they comprised the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 active gangs there, which is not typical. Usually have 1 or 2. And I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988. I buried my 169th young person 2 weeks ago, a young man named Irvin, who worked for me. He was waiting for a bus to come to Homeboy. So we did a lot of things. We started a school, and then Homeboy said, if only we had jobs. And then we tried to find felony-friendly employers in the factories that surrounded the projects, and that was not that forthcoming. And then we said, well, we can't wait. So we started our first business in 1992, Homeboy Bakery, where rival gang members worked together. It was a bakery right across the street from the church. And then a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in Grand Central Market in downtown LA. And once we had the 2 businesses, we came up with the highfalutin Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this, you know. And now we're the largest gang intervention and rehab center in the United States of America. We have 15,000 people walk through our doors each year seeking our services, job placement. We have job developers. We have free tattoo removal, 3 laser machines, 12 doctors, 4,000 laser treatments a year. And that began just because a gang member walked in one day right out of Corcoran State Prison with "fuck the world" tattooed on his forehead. From here to here was like a billboard. And he said, "I'm having a hard time finding a job." I said, well, maybe we could put our heads together on this one, you know. And so, and tattoo removal was born. I went to a doctor, and then one thing led to another, and now there is no place on the planet that removes more tattoos than we do. And not every business that we started was successful. Anything worth doing is worth failing at. You know, Homeboy Plumbing was not a huge success. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I didn't see that coming. And so now we have 5 businesses. We have our farmers markets. We're about 12 farmers markets at the moment where we sell our products. The solar panel installation training program, Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Silkscreen, Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, where we sell our logo material, and Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And we cater, and it's gourmet, it's magnificent food. About 3 months ago, Oscar-winning actress and movie star Diane Keaton showed up for lunch one day. She had never been there before. She came with a guy who's there once a week. And her waitress today is Glinda. And Glinda is kind of a been there, done that, homegirl, gang member, tattooed, been to prison, on parole. She does not know who Diane Keaton is. So she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glinda rattles off the 3 dishes that she thinks are her favorites. And Diane Keaton says, I'll have that second one. And then something dawns on Glinda. She looks at Diane Keaton. She goes, wait a minute. I feel like I've met you before. You seem so familiar to me, like I know you. And Diane Keaton sort of deflects it. Oh, gosh, I don't know. I suppose I have one of those faces, that people think they've seen before. And then Glinda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. And suddenly, Kinship. So quickly, Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress. Exactly what God had in mind. I think all of us are called to become what the late child psychologist Alice Miller calls enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love return people to themselves. It's not about holding the bar up and asking anybody to measure up. It's just about showing up and holding the mirror up and telling the truth. And your truth is their truth. That you are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And so you watch as folks on the margins become this truth, inhabit this truth. And no bullet can pierce it. And no 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's really that huge. And so people start to have a light grasp on life, which is exactly what's supposed to happen. Parentheses. I was reading the New Yorker profile on the Dalai Lama, and the reporter asks him about his own death, and he just shrugs and he smiles and he says, change of clothing. I thought that was pretty, I want what he's having. I think that's great. Also in the same article, parenthetically, it has Oprah asking him a question on TV, and Oprah says, so you think the whole world should meditate? And the Dalai Lama thinks. He goes, stupid question, he says to her. I love that. I mean, who hasn't wanted to say that to her? Anyway, but I digress. So, and so you tell people the truth. You tell them that they're exactly right. They don't have to measure up. They just have to discover the truth. But the principal suffering of the poor throughout history is not that they can't pay their rent on time or that they are short $20 for a package of Pampers. The principal suffering of the poor is shame and disgrace. And part of our task as a community of kinship is to reach in and dismantle those messages. I am in 25 different detention facilities where I say Mass on a rotating basis, all the probation camps, juvenile halls, youth authority facilities. And then, like on Saturdays, I have a couple of them before noon. Then I race home to Dolores Mission, where I've been there for a quarter of a century. So I know a lot of people. And then it begins, at 1 o'clock I have baptisms, and 2 o'clock quinceañeras, and 3 o'clock weddings, and 4 o'clock exorcisms, and just checking if you're still listening. I've actually never done one of those. But so then one day I was there, and it was like I had 20 minutes to 1 before my baptism. So I race over to my office. This was years ago, and I'm going through my mail just by myself. And I'm not there very long when all of a sudden a woman walks right into my office. I find out her name is Lisa. She's 34 years old. She's never stepped foot in my office. I've seen her around. She's kind of famous. She's a heroin addict, prostitute, gang member, felon, parolee. She's something of a famous gritona, which means she screams a lot. You always hear her screaming as they throw her out of the Meat La Cafe bar, yelling at the owner. Or she'll yell into a payphone, just let me stay tonight, pleading with family or friends. And this is the moment she's chosen for the very first time to walk into my office, and now I see I have 7 minutes before the 1 o'clock baptism. She comes in, she sits down, she launches right in. I need help. Oh, I've been to like 50 rehabs. I'm known all over, nationwide. And she said, I went to Catholic schools all my life. Elementary. I graduated from Sacred Heart High School in Lincoln Heights. And then she gets silent and still. And she says, in fact, first time I ever used heroin was right after I graduated. And I've been trying to stop since the moment I began. And I watched as she leaned her head against the wall, and her eyes became like two ponds, water rising to meet its edges and spilling over. She cried and she cried until she leveled her eyes at me, and she said with great deliberation, I am a disgrace. And suddenly her shame meets mine. Because when I saw her walk through that door that day, I had mistaken her for an interruption. It's mutual. It's mutual. There's a mantra I use. It comes from an old Christmas carol. O holy night, long lay the world in sin and error pining till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. And yeah, it's about Christmas. And yeah, it's about Jesus. How is it not, though, the job description of everybody in this room? It's about appearing and the soul feels its worth. There was a kid years ago who was just resistant to every offer of help I could give. I would ride my bike in the middle of the night in the projects, and I could see this kid Bandit. They all called him Bandit. He would run up to a car and sell crack cocaine. And then he'd turn around and he'd be counting the money as he'd walk toward the light, and there I'd be, and he wasn't even all that embarrassed. How about a real job? I'd say to him. Oh, I'm okay. Thanks, G. Very polite. Until 15 years ago, he showed up in my office one day. I couldn't believe he was there. And he said, I'm tired of being tired. So I walk him to a job developer, and as luck would have it, they find him a job right away. Entry-level, warehouse, unskilled, low pay, first kind of job. And now cut to today. Bandit runs the warehouse. He is the main chingon of the whole warehouse. He's married, has 3 kids, owns his own home. I hadn't heard from him in like 2 years, and no news is usually good news with gang members, so he calls me on a Friday afternoon, a little bit breathless and a little bit panicky. He says, Gee, you got to bless my daughter. ¿Qué pasó, mijo? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital? Oh, no. On Sunday, she's going to Humboldt College. Imagine, my oldest, my Jessica, she's going to college. But she's a little chaparrita. We're a little afraid for her because it's way up north. It's far. Could you give her a blessing before she goes? I go, sure. I said, look, tomorrow, why don't you come at 12:30? I have baptisms at 1. Come at 12:30. We'll do a little send-off. And so at 12:30, they all show up, Bandit and his wife and the 3 kids, including tiny little Jessica, heading to Humboldt College. And I said, well, let's stand in front of the altar. So I situate them there, and I said, let's put Jessica in the middle. Let's surround her with love. Everybody touch her. Everybody connect. Touch her arms. Put your hands on her shoulder. Hands on her head. Everybody got her. Okay. Now bow your heads and close your eyes. And as the homies say, I do a long-ass prayer. I go on. And somewhere in the middle of this prayer, we all become chillones, as we say in Spanish, sniffling, crying. We're all crying. I don't know why we're crying. Except for the fact that Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their families. And so we finished the prayer, and we were wiping our eyes, and we're kind of laughing at how mushy and sentimental we got. So I look at Jessica. So, what are you going to study at Humboldt College? She was very quick. Forensic psychology. I go, damn, forensic psychology? And Bandit chimes in, yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind. And Jessica, very deadpan, turns and looks at her father and does one of these, And he sees her and gets the joke, Yeah, I'm going to be her first subject, he says. So we go outside and big abrazos and we say goodbye and the kids, everybody piles in the car, but Bandit hangs back. And I said, hey, can I tell you something before you go? I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you. And his eyes fill up with tears. And he looks at me and he says, ¿Sabes qué? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them. I said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. And suddenly, kinship. The poet Mary Oliver writes, there's some things you can't reach, but you can reach out to them. And all day long, I'll just tell you one more story. Before I do that, I owe it to my organization to tell you that I have a book called Tattoos on the Heart. And if you buy this book and it does well and becomes Tuesdays with Homie or the Purpose-Driven Homie or something like that, then I can keep my doors open. The book arrived a month before the pub date, so I'm opening the mail in my office and there are a bunch of homies in there. And so, hey, here's my book. It's coming out in a month. So I pass it around. And my editor got all these nice people to say nice things about the book. Anne Lamott and Kerry Kennedy and Marion Wright Edelman. And on the back of the book is Jack Kornfield, who's a kind of a guru and a hero and a wonderful wisdom figure, psychologist and Buddhist. And he has his blurb, a paragraph. And the first sentence has all these kind of effusive adjectives. But the second sentence begins, Father Boyle, the Gandhi of the gangs. So I'm passing this around, and one of the homies gets it named Pascual. And Pascual, homie, gang member, been to prison, grew up in the projects, but went to college, graduated from Northridge. And he runs our parenting classes, and I think part of his job description is to always take me down a notch. So he sees this thing from Jack Kornfield. He goes, the Gandhi of the gangs, like this is way over the top, And so the next day he emails me and he goes, here's a blurb for your book. This book is astounding. Father Boyle is the Sarah Palin of the gangs. In fact, he can see Mexico from his back porch. So I keep trying to get that on the paperback edition. But my editor is not thinking this is as funny as I think it was. So anyway, last story. I was in a bookstore not long ago, and I was flipping through Laura Bush's memoir, only to notice that she's dedicated 3 pages to Homeboy Industries, and that's because she came to visit in a previous regime that you may recall about 5 years ago. And so she was traveling around the country visiting after-school programs that helped kids. We were the only gang intervention program she visited. And the Secret Service thought, and we shouldn't do this at the headquarters because it's too porous. It'd be too hard to secure. So we had it at the Homeboy Silkscreen Factory, which is kind of in a warehouse area. And we could only have 50 people there, we were told. And on the day of the visit was bomb-sniffing dogs, sharpshooters on all the roofs of the surrounding factories, sharpshooters even inside the building in the rafters aimed at the homies. Have no idea what they thought these guys would do to this woman, but they were prepared for it. So about 3 weeks before the visit, the head of the Secret Service detail, kind of a Clint Eastwood severe-looking type guy, came up to me and says, Father, I'm going to need the names of the 50 people who are going to shake hands with the First Lady of the United States. I'm going to need their birth dates. I'm going to need their Social Security numbers. So we decided to declare undocumented worker day off day on exactly that day, just you guys stay home, come the following day. And so I typed up my list of 50, and so I handed it to him. 3 days later, he's in my office looking even more severe than he previously had looked. He said, oh, wow, yeah, Father, these people have records, he says to me, like this news might come as a surprise to me, and I said, well, at Homeboy Industries, it's sort of the idea, and so we had to negotiate, 2 in particular, who apparently their resumes were too long, but we finally got them in. And the visit went off without a hitch, and it was, and the homies and the homegirls felt real proud that the wife of the President of the United States came to visit them. Well, about 3 months later, I get a phone call from a staffer in the White House in the First Lady's office. And this woman says, Mrs. Bush is having a national conference called Helping America's Youth. It'll be at Howard University in Washington, D.C. She would like you to speak at it. I said, I'd be honored to. Oh, she says, Mrs. Bush would like you to bring 3 homies with you. Now, whether the First Lady of the United States used the H word, I'm not certain, you know. And then she said, afterwards, a select group of participants will be invited into the White House for dinner. Now, certainly crooks have resided in this house before, but it may well be the first time gang members have ever stepped foot in there, you know. So then I picked, out of our 300 employees, I picked 3 of the most menacing-looking gang members I could find, just to mess with the White House a little bit, you know, and you gotta have to do that. And so I picked Gus, Herbie, and Gabriel, and been to prison, late 20s, you know, tattooed. So I call them into my office. I say, look, you're going to dinner at the White House. You can't exactly wear size 85 waist Dickies. So we got to get you some suits. So we go to Men's Warehouse. You know, you're going to like the way you look. I guarantee it, yeah. Well, that guy wasn't there, but we walk into the Men's Warehouse in Burbank, and I swear to you, every single solitary salesperson rushes us at the door as if to say, now how may we help the 3 of you leave our store as quickly as possible? I said, well, we're going to be needing 3 suits. They're having dinner at the White House. You know, the guy said, yeah, right, sure. So he escorts them into dressing rooms. I'm out there picking through ties. And finally, the first of our group, Gabriel, comes out. And Gabriel's in a perfectly fitted light gray suit. He's standing in front of a 6-sided mirror. He's just staring at himself. Now, Gabriel at the time was 25 years old. He doesn't work for us at the moment. He moved on to a better job. His neck was blackened with the name of his gang. His face had lots of tattoos. His head did as well. He had, at that point, had undergone like 37 laser treatments. They're very painful. He needs just like 96 more, and he'll be good to go. And but they really looked quite better than when he first arrived at our place. He did a lot of things at our office. He supervised the part-time workers, but he mainly was our tour guide. He was our premier tour guide. He'd greet you at the front door in his $1 million smile. He'd introduce you to the job developers. He'd hand you goggles so you could watch tattoos being removed on the premises. He'd give you a hairnet so you could walk into the bakery and watch rival gang members bake bread together. He'd take you into the cafe, tell you what his favorite dishes were. He gave great tours. But beyond that, it was the quality of his heart, pure, innocent, true, golden. The day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than this guy Gabriel. So I walk up to him, I tap him on the shoulder. I said, "Are you okay?" He goes, "Damn, G, I'm already pinching myself." Like he can't believe he's in a suit. Can't believe he's headed to the White House. Well, I bought the tickets like months in advance, but about 2 weeks before we were scheduled to go, I called Gabriel into my office, and I don't know what compelled me. I said, "Hey, Gabriel, did you ask permission of your parole officer to go to Washington, D.C.? And he said, "Of course I did." I go, "Phew, God, I'm just checking." "Yeah, she said no." I go, "Gabriel, when were you going to get around to telling me this?" "Well, I wasn't going to tell you. I was afraid you wouldn't let me go," like a little kid. I said, "Miko, we got to do this the right way. So what's her number?" So I call the woman. I give the whole spiel: White House, conference, suits, dinner. And she says, "Nope, high control." High control parole means a kind of a super hyper vigilance. I said, "Could I talk to your supervisor?" So she transfers the call. I give the spiel again. The guy says, "No way, high control." Is there somebody like a notch above you? You know, when they send me to the notch guy, And I explain it again, and the guy says, let me be really clear with you. There is no way this guy's leaving the state of California. He's a high control parolee. They all seem to be having a really bad case of, and Gabriel, who exactly did you think you were, that you get to go to White House for dinner? So faxes and emails and phone calls from the Department of Justice and the White House and the First Lady's office, and in what may well be the singular accomplishment of the Bush administration, we get permission to go. We were going to go anyway, but I mean, permission, I find, is preferable. So the day of our departure was a Tuesday, and it was mishap after mishap. The homies were late, and like they always are, so it put us into bumper-to-bumper traffic. And I turned to nobody in particular on the freeway, stuck there. Hey, did all you guys remember to bring your IDs? Silence. A lone voice from the back seat. Shit. It's Gus. We have to go back and get his ID. We left on a Tuesday. We went and stayed with my brother and his wife in Washington, D.C. And then we did the touristy things Tuesday and Wednesday. But Thursday was the day of the suits, the day of the conference, the day of the White House and the dinner. And it was then, Thursday morning, that we discovered that apparently poor old Gabriel, as he's running to my car on that Tuesday morning in the early morning darkness with his bag slung over one shoulder and his men's warehouse suit covered in plastic, open at the bottom over the other shoulder. And the movement apparently jostled the pants, and they slithered off the hanger, and they fell somewhere unbeknownst to him on the sidewalk or in the gutter. And some homeless man is liking the way he looks, I guarantee it. And Gabriel yells this plaintive cry in my brother's house, I don't got no pants, he yells. And my sister-in-law, God love her, she jerry-rigs a pair of my brother's pants, and he looks fine, nobody notices. So we finish the conference, we walk into the White House for dinner, these three gang members in their suits and their ties and their tattoos. And their butlers walking the halls with trays of long-stem glasses of white wine, and the homies are snatching those puppies as quickly as they can. And we walk into the blue room and the green room and the red room, and little string quartets and little brass combos, and elegant. And the gold room has the food, gourmet, most delicious food I've ever had in my life. I went back like 8 times. Rack of lamb, perfection. A salmon like the size of Wisconsin. It had salads and pastas, every imaginable food. And I'm standing there with Gabriel, and he eyeballs these long white potatoes cut lengthwise with a hole carefully bored out in the middle, stuffed with caviar and a sprig of chive. And Gabriel pops that sucker in his mouth. Spits it out in a napkin. This shit tastes nasty, he says. And let's just say he wasn't using his inside voice at the time. And it wasn't me or did the Secret Service lunge ever so slightly at precisely that moment. Well, I told you all that to tell you this. The next day we're flying home, and we're in mid-country, and Gabriel says, I gotta go to the baño. I said, well, Miko, the bathroom's at the back of the plane. 45 minutes later, he comes back. And I said, ¿Qué pasó? I thought you fell in, okay. Oh, I was just talking to that lady back there. And I turn around and I see the flight attendant standing by herself at the back of the plane. I made her cry. I hope that's okay. I go, Gabriel, it might depend on what you actually said to her. Well, she saw my tattoos and she saw my Homeboy Industries shirt. I don't know. She asked me a gang of questions. So I gave her a tour of the office at 34,000 feet. Gabriel walks this woman through the office, introduces her to the job developers, hands her goggles so she can watch tattoos removed on the premises, gives her a hairnet so she can see enemy rival gang members bake bread together. And last night I told her we made history. For the first time in the history of this country, 3 gang members walked into the White House. We had dinner there. I told her the food tasted nasty. And she cried. I said, well, Gabriel, what you expect? She just caught a glimpse of you. She saw that you are somebody. She recognized you as the shape of God's heart. People cry sometimes when they see that. And suddenly, kinship so quickly, two souls feeling their worth, exactly what God had in mind. It's mutual. Yeah, maybe there are some things we can't reach, but we can reach out to them. And all day long, for the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we wait for it. Thank you very much.